function, and fuel. So when we think about form, we're thinking of a structure in the body, and that can entail static posture itself, postural muscles, the way that we hold ourselves up, as well as seeing a true leg length inequality when those bones are at different length in the body. Function is going to deal with neurology. Those are your primitive reflexes. What are primitive reflexes? It's the stuff we are born with and then we develop in our very early stages of how we'll roll back over, how we'll try to start crawling and things like that. Movement reflexes, that's how we then respond and react to what happens in the world. So when we touch something hot or we step on something. And then motions play into that, believe it or not. When we think we get a gut feeling about something, it ties into that function as well. Fuel stands for the chemical. Chemical has to deal with the food and nutrition, what we put into our body, as well as drugs and chemicals that we get around are also put into our body. And digestion, is the digestion working? You're only as good as what you actually process in the body. So you can be eating well. If it's not processing properly, it's not going to work right. So if we get that form and function right, that affects our life activities. If we get the form and fuel right, that builds our longevity. If we get our function and our fuel right, that deals with our healing capacity itself. If we get that fuel wrong, we can't heal. If we get the function wrong, we get uncoordinated motion and we end up with getting injuries. And if we get the form wrong, we end up with fatigue and breakdown in the body. What we're really talking about here is what gets called adaptive response. We want that adaptive response of the body to work correctly, because the body is not designed to be healthy. The body's designed to adapt. That's why we've made it so long. So what do I see in my office a lot? People come in, and very frequently, that muscle right there is the top muscle that I find a problem with. The lower trapezius is what that's called. Now the trapezius is made up of three parts. That lower part, the middle part, and then that upper part. Guess what happens when this guy doesn't work right and hold that shoulder down? That one gets really tight. It's short, and the body says, I'm supposed to have tension on that muscle, so it sends a signal to tighten it up. So you're always wanting to go in and get a massage on this upper part of your neck. And there's a lot of therapy that entails going and working on chasing down the area the person's complaining about and not looking deeper into the root of the problem. Because if we get this muscle turned back on, that muscle is going to have the correct, what they call reciprocal inhibition, and it's not going to get so tight. But there's more to it than that, because what plays underneath all of those structures? Look at the directions of the fibers on the rhomboid muscles. They also are going to get shortened. They're going to tighten up, so you're going to get that pain right there through that part of your back. And as well, the harder one to see is this little guy right here. You get that little spot on the end, the corner of your scapula, and you get that knot that gets so sore. That's levator scapula, and that ties into your neck. Guess what? Now you can't turn your head one way or the other. It's going to hurt to turn your head. All of this gets affected because of that scapula rising up high, but there's another muscle that the body says, hey, I can try to hold that scapula down with a different muscle, and that's this one right there. That's called the serratus anterior. But you can kind of tell it's not quite aligned the right way, and what tends to happen along this one is you get really sore down along that little line where they attach into the ribs. Most people don't even know they're sore there. They'll come and touch there if you realize. And that muscle is actually overworked. It's not doing its job either. When that muscle gets affected, serratus anterior is the next one after that lower tract. Then it ties into that scapula again. Remember that bone up here I talked about? That little guy right there? And it starts to rotate. When that doesn't rotate right, this is your teres minor. This is a little tiny muscle. And in fact, when we do the representations like this, they draw it bigger than it actually is. It's a little tiny muscle. And it's just meant to rotate the arm out. We don't really work with this. This just positions our arm. So when the body tries to send a signal to make it work, it overworks and it gets really exquisitely tender. You'll find this one, and boy, the patient jumps when you touch this muscle and it's acting up. The body tries to stabilize that shoulder with the wrong muscles, and now you start to end up with either a shoulder pain or, worse yet, a shoulder injury that you then have to do further treatment on. Next thing that will happen on that body is the pectoralis minor, this little muscle in the front of the body, tries to hold that shoulder from moving, tries to keep that scapula from moving, and it's too small. It can't do that job. So now this gets sore. Why this becomes important is because when that pectoralis minor swells up and starts to put pressure against the thoracic duct, this is where the body drains its lymphatic fluid when you're resting, when you're sleeping. This is why you wake up all groggy and sore. And then you'll get up and you'll start to move around, and your secondary movement in lymphatics comes from your muscles contracting. So you get up and walk around, you'll feel better in about 15, 20 minutes. When you hear the patient saying that, you know that lymphatic flow has been affected, and that's little muscle. And it all started with which muscle? That lower trap. That was giving trouble. Next one that I see a lot of has to deal more with the lower back. And you'll hear about people that, yeah, they come in, they think of the chiropractor for low back pain. Low back and neck pain, that's all people ever think about a chiropractor. And it really deals with these pelvic muscle groups. The glutes, and the glutes are really tied in. If this neck got really tight, that can affect the glutes. 80% of the time when I find trouble in the glutes, it's actually coming from up here in the neck. So it started with that earlier stage of problems. And of course, the glutes are made up of three groups. There's the glute max, that's the big muscle we think of. But then the glute medius is underneath it, and the glute minimus is even underneath that and moves a little further forward. Those start not working right. The body tries to compensate with this little muscle called the piriformis. Who's heard of piriformis syndrome or sciatica? This is usually what's involved with that. That muscle starts to bunch up. And 30% of the population, the sciatic nerve actually grows inside of that muscle. That muscle actually surrounds it. That muscle gets tight, it's going to pinch on that sciatic nerve. Now, for the rest of us that don't have that pinching problem, it sits right next to it, so if it bulks up, it's still going to push on it either way. That's going to be the root of your sciatic trouble. And you want to catch sciatica before the pain gets down past the knee. Once it gets past that knee, it's a lot harder to get under control. So you want to catch it when it's just up here in the lateral part of the thigh, or even if you can catch it when it's just your butt that's hurting, you're going to do a lot better in care. When we look at it from the side, you can see that that piriformis is right there. What I watch happen is the piriformis is the initiator of this, and yes, we have to deal with it, but the body tries to compensate with those other muscles again. This is what we do. Remember what I say earlier, we adapt, right? We don't try to be healthy, we try to adapt. That glute medius gets sore, so I'll work on that piriformis, and it's a little sore. I'll get to the glute medius, and oh wow, that's a lot more sore than that piriformis was. And if it's been allowed to really get into a deeper stage of the problem, that glute minimus, and they're going to be sore out here to the outer edge, and that will give them trouble. Those of you who have been to my office, we talk about pelvic torque a lot, and it's like, well, what the hell is pelvic torque? It's an asymmetry in the muscles. This is what causes those legs to be a different length functionally. The muscles are holding that pelvis torque one way or the other. What would do that? Big muscle that would cause this is the iliacus. Now, iliacus works along with another muscle called the psoas, but the two of them together are what bring the leg forward when we walk. So we deal with gaining reflexes, how the body moves when it walks. Now you can just imagine, if one of those muscles was tighter than the other, it would take that pelvic bowl and just pull it one way or the other. That's going to put the pressure on those nerves in that low back. You're going to get the low back pain, but it's coming usually from these muscles. If it's the iliacus that's weak, the psoas is the one that tries to do the work for it. And what does that psoas do? It comes in and attaches right up there in that upper portion of the low back. Up in here, you'll get that ache along that area. And when we're dealing with a young person that's in their growth phase, this is the muscle that can be related with scoliosis. If we have one of these firing more than the other, it takes and pulls the spine over. And vertebrae are kind of funny. The growth stimulation, when we're going through that growth spurt as a child, comes from the pressure on the vertebra. So if we're pushing down on that vertebra, it's going to grow faster where there's more pressure. So if we're pulling it to one side, it's going to try to compensate by growing, and you'll end up with a wedge-shaped vertebra. There's not a lot you can do after it's a wedge-shaped vertebra, but if you can catch it early and find the muscle imbalance, you can do a lot for it. When I talked about the gait, there's other muscles that we really get involved with, and that upper trap gets involved. This muscle here, the latissimus dorsi, really gets involved too, because that's what deals with our arms swinging back and forth. And of course, those underneath structures will try to compensate and give us trouble. Supraspinatus, which is up here at the top, that gets involved with gait as well. And so that lat gets involved, that supraspinatus gets involved, and I'm just about out of time, but I'm hoping this was something that was somewhat helpful to kind of get the middle picture. When I got you on the table, this unfortunately is just what my brain is going through, trying to figure out, okay, which muscle, who's the instigator of the trouble on this patient, and can we do the most good for them in this session that we're working with them. Remember, it's designed to adapt, not to be healthy. And I did leave time for questions, about 10 seconds. So get a one-to-one with me, and remember, I try to save lives with the power of chiropractic.